How does a cultural giant become a trivia question? How can a man whose face was beamed into millions of homes every week, whose fingers could conjure lightning from a guitar, and whose laughter was the soundtrack to a generation's Saturday nights, reseed into the quiet mists of collective memory? This is the story of Roy Clark, a household name who once stood at the apex of American entertainment, a virtuoso musician, a beloved television host, and a global ambassador for country music. It is the story of his remarkable, improbable ascent from the hard-scrabbled dirt of Depression-era Virginia to the brightest stages in the world. And it is the story of the strange, gentle decline that followed, a fading of the light that leaves behind a legacy both monumental and, for too many, nearly forgotten. This is not a story of tragedy or scandal. It is something far more complex and perhaps more poignant, a case study in the fleeting nature of fame, the evolution of culture, and the quiet endurance of a man whose greatest ambition was not to be remembered, but simply to share the boundless joy he found in a simple wooden box with 6 steel strings. To understand the incandescent talent that was Roy Clark, one must first understand the world that forged him. Roy Linwood Clark was born on April 15th, 1933, in Meherrin, Virginia, a small, unassuming dot on the map, nestled in the rolling hills of the Piedmont. It was the heart of the Great Depression, a time of profound scarcity and relentless struggle, but also a time when families clung to the intangible treasures they possessed. For the Clark family, that treasure was music. His father, Hester, was a man whose hands were calloused from work in cotton mills and sawmills, yet they moved with surprising grace across the strings of a guitar, banjo, or fiddle. He was a gifted amateur musician, a man who found solace and expression in the old-time tunes of the Appalachian hills. His mother, Lillian, filled their modest home with the warmth of her voice as she sang along. Their house, though often lacking in material comfort, was never quiet. It was a sanctuary of sound, a place where melody was as essential as bread. Into this world, Roy arrived as a child seemingly born with music as his native tongue. Before he could properly read, he was drawn to the instruments that lay around the house. At the age of 5, with a child's ingenuity, he fashioned his first instrument, a banjo made from a cigar box, a broom handle, and 2 ukulele strings. It was a crude, tiny thing for tiny hands, but in its creation, a lifelong obsession was ignited. The family's life was itinerant, a constant search for work that pulled them across Virginia and Maryland. They eventually settled in the burgeoning urban landscape of Washington, D.C., a move that represented a profound cultural shock. They left behind the slow agrarian rhythms of rural Virginia for the bustling, politically charged atmosphere of the nation's capital during the Roosevelt administration and the Second World War. Yet even in the city, the Clarks carried the spirit of the Virginia soil with them. Their apartment was an outpost of country soul amidst the federal buildings and urban sprawl. It was in D.C. that Roy's formal, or rather informal, musical education truly began. When he was 14, Hester bought him a proper 4-string banjo, and just a few months later, a 6-string guitar. What followed was an astonishing display of obsessive dedication. Roy wasn't merely learning to play. He was consuming music. He would lock himself in his room for hours, sometimes for entire days, his ear pressed to the radio, absorbing every note he could find. He listened to the Grand Ole Opry broadcasts from Nashville, studying the intricate finger-picking of Merle Travis and the smooth, sophisticated stylings of Chet Atkins. He devoured the high, lonesome sound of bluegrass, the complex harmonies of jazz, and the raw energy of the blues. He was entirely self-taught, guided by an almost preternatural ear and a relentless work ethic. He could hear a complex musical phrase once and replicate it perfectly, often embellishing it with his own brilliant flourishes. Within a year, the boy was playing with a dexterity and musical maturity that belied his age. He wasn't just good, he was a prodigy, a force of nature. Hester Clark saw this extraordinary gift blooming in his son. He watched Roy's eyes burning with concentration and heard the melodies flowing like a fountain from those young hands. He recognized that this was not a mere hobby. It was a destiny. In a profound act of faith, Hester made a pivotal decision. "Son," he told Roy, his voice low but resolute, "I will not stop you. You were born to do this, and I will do everything I can to help you." Hester became his son's first and most fervent champion. He began driving the skinny, baby-faced teenager to country and jazz clubs in and around D.C. These were dimly lit, smoke-filled establishments where hardened musicians played for hardened crowds. To get Roy on stage, Hester would often have to stretch the truth about his age, claiming the boy was 18. Any skepticism from club owners vanished the moment Roy began to play. The music that poured from his instrument was a revelation, a torrent of notes played with breathtaking speed, precision, and a pure, unadulterated joy. Hester would stand in the back of the room, a silent, proud observer, watching in amazement as his son captivated audiences of farmers, factory workers, and other people who were interested in farming, and factory workers, and seasoned musicians alike. Roy's early career was a whirlwind apprenticeship in the vibrant, underrated country music scene of the Washington, D.C. area. He became a fixture on local radio stations like WARL in Arlington, Virginia, performing live on air. He played in dance halls, dive bars, and honky-tonks, learning his craft not in a classroom, but on the stage. This was his crucible. He played everything and anything demanded of him: traditional country, western swing, pop standards, rockabilly, and sophisticated jazz. He learned how to read a crowd, how to pace a set, how to tell a joke to break the tension, and how to command a stage with nothing but his talent and his burgeoning charisma. This grueling schedule forged the performer who would one day charm millions. It was during these years that he honed his signature lightning-fast finger style, a breathtaking hybrid that blended the elegance of Chet Atkins, the foundational thumb-picking of Merle Travis, and a raw, joyful energy that was entirely his own. He was a musical sponge, absorbing influences and synthesizing them into something new and exhilarating. But the road to stardom is rarely a straight line, and Roy's path was marked by a significant and humbling setback. In one of the great ironies of country music history, a young Roy Clark had a memorable falling out at the Grand Ole Opry. In the mid-1950s, while touring as a guitarist for Webb Pierce, Roy was dismissed from a performance by Opry manager Jim Denny. The reasons were his tardiness and a flamboyant rock and roll inflected style that clashed with the Opry's conservative traditions. Though not an official member at the time, being told he was not Opry material was a significant setback. Playing on the hallowed Opry stage was the dream of every country musician. But Roy's youthful exuberance and rock and roll inflected style clashed with the Opry's deeply conservative traditions. The Opry of that era was ruled with an iron fist by manager Jim Denny, a staunch traditionalist who enforced a rigid set of rules to preserve the show's wholesome down-home image. Roy, brimming with creative energy, would often inject flamboyant rockabilly-style riffs into his solos, playing louder and with more showmanship than Denny deemed appropriate. The tension culminated when Roy, juggling a demanding tour schedule, arrived late for a performance. For Denny, this was the final straw. He summoned Roy to his office and fired him on the spot. "You're not Opry material," Denny stated coldly, the words a crushing blow to the young artist. Being exiled from the genre's most sacred institution could have ended his career. Years later, Roy would admit with characteristic humility that the firing was probably justified, a harsh but necessary lesson in professionalism. But in that moment, the rejection lit a fire within him. It was a formative experience that instilled in him a resolve not just to prove Denny wrong, but to one day return to that stage not as a sideman, but as a headliner who had redefined what an Opry star could be. Undeterred, Roy continued to hustle. He bounced between Los Angeles and D.C., taking whatever work he could find. He became a sideman for the fiery Wanda Jackson, the queen of rockabilly, whose explosive performance style was a perfect match for Roy's flashy guitar work. He also reportedly shared bills with a young Elvis Presley at some early shows. He landed a steady gig at the Golden Nugget in Las Vegas, a glitzy high-stakes world, a universe away from the dirt roads of Meherrin. The Vegas years were transformative. Here, he wasn't playing for a dedicated country audience. He was playing for tourists from all over the world, people who might not know a thing about country music, but knew a great entertainer when they saw one. He learned to master a tough room, to use comedy as a universal language, and to build a show with relentless, high-octane energy. He was no longer just a musician, he was becoming a complete showman. It was during these lean but formative years that Roy developed a peculiar habit, a testament to his unwavering faith in his craft. When money was tight, he would go out and buy another guitar. "If I get in a bind, I'll go out and buy another instrument," he later explained with a wry smile. To an outsider, it seemed like madness, an irresponsible extravagance for a struggling artist. But for Roy, it was an investment in his soul. Each new instrument was a new voice, a new challenge, a new reason to keep pushing forward. He saw his guitars not as tools, but as partners in his creative journey, each with its own stories to tell and songs to unlock. This deep, almost spiritual connection to his instruments was the anchor that kept him grounded through the uncertainty of his early career. Roy Clark's ascent to national stardom was a pivotal moment in his career, marked by a fortuitous combination of talent, timing, and personal charm that propelled him from the gritty club circuit of Washington, D.C., to the bright lights of American television screens. His big break came in 1960, a watershed year when opportunity knocked in the form of an invitation from Jimmy Dean, a fellow musician who had shared the same vibrant D.C. music scene. Dean, who had risen to prominence as a singer and entertainer, had recently secured his own nationally televised variety program, The Jimmy Dean Show. Having witnessed Roy's performances countless times in local venues, Dean was well aware of his friend's extraordinary talent, a rare blend of technical virtuosity and an effortless magnetic charisma that captivated audiences. Recognizing this, Dean extended an invitation for Roy to become a featured performer on his show, a decision that would alter the trajectory of Clark's career. When Roy Clark stepped onto the set of The Jimmy Dean Show, he was thrust into the living rooms of millions of Americans each week, a platform that showcased his remarkable versatility and undeniable appeal. Viewers were immediately enthralled by the breadth of his musical prowess. One moment, Roy would deliver a blistering guitar solo, his fingers flying across the fretboard with a precision and passion that left audiences in awe. The next, he might cradle a banjo, coaxing out a delicate, intricate bluegrass melody that spoke to the heart of American roots music. Yet it wasn't just his instrumental mastery that won over the audience. Roy's warm, infectious smile and quick, self-deprecating wit made him instantly relatable. He wasn't a distant, untouchable star. He was approachable, genuine, and likable, a performer who felt like a friend you'd invite into your home. This combination of musical brilliance and down-to-earth charm made him a standout, transforming him into a household name almost overnight. The exposure from the Jimmy Dean Show served as a springboard for Roy's career, opening doors to opportunities that had previously seemed out of reach. The national spotlight brought with it recording contracts, and in 1963, Roy achieved a significant milestone with his first major hit single, The Tips of My Fingers. This soulful country ballad was a departure from the high-energy instrumental showcases that had defined much of his live performances. Instead, it highlighted his surprisingly tender and expressive vocal abilities, revealing a depth and emotional resonance that surprised even some of his longtime fans. The song's heartfelt lyrics and Roy's nuanced delivery struck a chord with listeners, propelling it to the top 10 on the country charts. This success cemented his status as a legitimate recording artist, proving that his talents extended beyond the stage to the studio, where he could craft songs that resonated with a broad audience. The success of The Tips of My Fingers opened the floodgates to television's most prestigious platforms. Roy's charisma and versatility made him a natural fit for variety shows, and he soon found himself performing on iconic programs like The Ed Sullivan Show, where he shared stages with some of the biggest names in entertainment. However, it was his relationship with Johnny Carson in The Tonight Show that would prove to be the most significant and enduring of his television appearances. Carson, the undisputed king of late-night television, was immediately taken with Roy. He was captivated not only by Clark's musical talent, but also by his easygoing humor, quick wit, and natural storytelling ability. Roy had a unique gift. He could hold an audience spellbound with a complex, virtuosic instrumental piece, then pivot seamlessly to a folksy anecdote that left them laughing heartily. This ability to connect with audiences on multiple levels made him a favorite of Carson's, and he became a regular guest on the show. Over time, Roy's role expanded to that of a frequent guest host, a rare and prestigious honor, particularly for a country artist in an era when the genre was often pigeonholed as niche or regional. Roy's appearances on The Tonight Show were more than just career milestones, they were cultural touchstones. Seated on Carson's famous couch, Roy held his own alongside Hollywood movie stars, literary giants, and political figures. His presence was a testament to his versatility and charm, as he engaged in conversations with a sophistication and wit that defied stereotypes about country musicians. Through these appearances, Roy was quietly but powerfully dismantling preconceived notions about what a country artist could be. He wasn't just a picker from the rural South. He was a worldly, articulate entertainer who could bridge the gap between Nashville's country music scene and mainstream America. His universal appeal transcended genre and geography, making him a beloved figure to audiences who might never have tuned into a country radio station. In doing so, Roy became a cultural ambassador, introducing country music to new audiences and proving that its artists could hold their own in any setting. This growing fame inevitably led Roy back to the Grand Ole Opry, the hallowed institution that had once dismissed him as not Opry material early in his career. The irony of his return was not lost on the Nashville establishment or on Roy himself. Once an outsider, he was now welcomed back as a conquering hero, greeted with thunderous applause during his guest appearances. These performances were more than just triumphant homecomings. They were a vindication of Roy's talent and perseverance. The Opry, the epicenter of country music, could no longer deny his star power or his rightful place among its ranks. His induction as an official member seemed inevitable, a formality that would soon cement his legacy in the genre's most sacred space. Yet even as Roy basked in the glow of his Opry triumphs, an even greater opportunity loomed on the horizon, one that would not only solidify his place in American entertainment, but also etch his image into the cultural consciousness for generations to come. This next chapter would elevate Roy Clark from a celebrated musician to a true icon, forever changing the way America viewed country music and its stars. The year was 1969. America was a nation in turmoil, fractured by the Vietnam War, social upheaval, and a yawning generation gap. In this turbulent cultural climate, television producers, Frank Pepiat and John Aylesworth, fresh off their success with the psychedelic rapid-fire comedy show Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, had a novel idea. They wanted to create a country version of Laugh-In, a fast-paced variety show filled with quick-cut sketches, recurring characters, and of course, country music. It would be filmed in Nashville and would embrace a good-natured cornball sense of humor. They called it Hee Haw. They needed two hosts, one to represent the traditional West Coast Bakersfield sound, and another who could serve as the show's musical anchor and charismatic everyman. For the first role, they chose Buck Owens. For the second, there was only one possible choice, Roy Clark. Debuting on CBS in the summer of 1969, Hee Haw was an immediate and massive hit. It was unlike anything else on television. While sophisticated urban critics often dismissed it as lowbrow and unsophisticated, audiences across the American heartland adored it. The show was a joyful, unpretentious celebration of rural culture, featuring slapstick comedy in the cornfield, groan-inducing puns, and performances by the biggest stars in country music. At the heart of it all was Roy Clark. He was the show's soul, its musical engine, and its emotional core. Week after week, he was a whirlwind of talent. His lightning-fast guitar and banjo instrumentals were the show's musical high points, moments of breathtaking virtuosity that elevated the program beyond simple comedy. In the iconic Pickin' and Grinnin' segment, he and Buck Owens would trade musical licks and homespun jokes, their easy chemistry a testament to a deep friendship. Roy was the ultimate multi-talent. He could lead the entire cast in a gospel number, play a mournful fiddle tune, tell a joke with impeccable comic timing, and then silence the studio with a stunningly beautiful performance of a song, like Yesterday When I Was Young, a ballad that became his signature. He was the bridge between the show's silliness and its genuine heart. His warmth and sincerity made the corniest jokes feel endearing and the most heartfelt songs feel profound. Then, in 1971, the axe fell. In an act of stunning cultural arrogance that became known as the Rural Purge, CBS executives canceled Hee Haw and its fellow rural-themed hits to chase a more sophisticated urban demographic. It was a declaration that the heart of America no longer mattered to the network, but they underestimated the resilience of the cornfield. Refusing to surrender, Roy Clark, Buck Owens, and the show's producers engineered a pioneering move into first-run syndication. The result was not just a success, it was a spectacular rebellion. Freed from network control, Hee Haw exploded in popularity, running for another 21 years and proving not only that the executives were wrong, but that they had profoundly misjudged the soul of their own country. For the next 2 decades, Roy Clark was one of the most visible and beloved entertainers in America. He became a true cultural icon. He toured the world, played for presidents at the White House, and was a constant presence on talk shows and telethons. In a remarkable feat of cultural diplomacy, he became one of the first American artists to tour the Soviet Union, performing sold-out shows in Moscow and Leningrad in 1976. At the height of the Cold War, he stood on a Soviet stage with his banjo and guitar, breaking down ideological barriers with the universal language of music and his infectious smile. He branched out into acting, appearing in films and television shows. Yet, despite his superstar status, he remained remarkably humble and approachable. He never lost the down-to-earth demeanor of the boy from Virginia. As his friend Mel Tillis once said, Roy could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with a room full of friends. He treated everyone, from presidents to stagehands, with the same genuine warmth and respect. Beneath the genial, smiling exterior was a fiercely disciplined artist who practiced relentlessly, always striving to be better, but he made it all look effortless. As the world continued its relentless march forward, the cultural landscape of the early 1990s brought significant changes to the entertainment industry, including the eventual conclusion of Hee Haw's remarkable run in 1993. For over 2 decades, the show had been a vibrant celebration of country music and rural humor, a touchstone for millions of viewers who found joy in its unpretentious charm. However, the tides of popular culture were shifting. The new country revolution, which had begun in the late 1980s and gained momentum into the early 1990s, reshaped the genre that Roy Clark had helped elevate to mainstream prominence. Artists like Garth Brooks, Alan Jackson, and Shania Twain ushered in a new era of country music characterized by a polished, rock-infused sound, stadium-sized spectacles, and a slicker, more serious aesthetic. This evolution, while expanding the genre's reach, marked a departure from the homespun, light-hearted spirit of Hee Haw, signaling a broader transformation in how country music was perceived and consumed. Amid this changing landscape, Roy Clark remained a towering figure in the industry, revered as an elder statesman whose contributions to music and television were indelible. In 2009, his legacy was formally recognized with his induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame, a fitting tribute to a man whose career had spanned decades and genres. Even as the spotlight of mainstream fame began to dim, Roy's passion for performance never wavered. He continued to tour tirelessly, captivating audiences with the same virtuosic musicianship and infectious charisma that had defined his career. His fingers, still nimble and precise, danced across the strings of his guitar, banjo, and fiddle, proving that his talent was undiminished by time. Whether performing in intimate venues or larger concert halls, Roy brought the same energy and joy that had made him a star, connecting with audiences through his music and his warm, self-deprecating humor. However, the pervasive celebrity that had defined Roy's presence in the 1970s and 1980s began to recede as a new generation came of age with different cultural reference points. For younger audiences raised on MTV, pop crossover hits, and the burgeoning internet culture, Roy Clark was no longer the household name he had once been. To them, he was a figure from their parents' or grandparents' era, a smiling, guitar-wielding host from a quirky show featuring a talking donkey, corny puns, and a fictional cornfield. The fan-given nickname, King of the Cornfield, a badge of honor that captured his central role on Hee Haw, now carried a nostalgic, almost quaint connotation. Yet even as his name faded from the center of mainstream consciousness, Roy's influence remained profound, woven into the very fabric of modern music and entertainment. Roy Clark's impact as a musician was immeasurable, particularly for aspiring guitarists, banjo players, and fiddlers who were inspired by his performances. Countless musicians picked up an instrument after watching him on Hee Haw, mesmerized by the way his fingers flew across the fretboard with effortless precision, or plucked a banjo with a joy that made complex techniques look deceptively simple. Roy had a rare gift. He made technical brilliance feel accessible and inviting, never alienating his audience with pretense or aloofness. His performances were a masterclass in showmanship, blending virtuosity with an infectious enthusiasm that transcended genre boundaries. Whether he was tearing through a blazing bluegrass instrumental or delivering a tender country ballad, Roy demonstrated that music could be both sophisticated and fun, inspiring a generation to explore the guitar, banjo, and fiddle. His ability to bridge genres, country, bluegrass, jazz, and even classical, helped broaden the appeal of stringed instruments, leaving an enduring mark on musicians across styles. Beyond his contributions to music, Roy Clark's legacy extended into philanthropy and advocacy, areas where his humility and generosity shone brightly. He was a quiet but dedicated supporter of causes close to his heart, particularly music education and the preservation of American musical heritage. One of his most significant contributions was his instrumental role in establishing the American Banjo Museum in Oklahoma City. Roy not only donated his time and financial resources, but also contributed priceless instruments from his personal collection, ensuring that the history and artistry of the banjo, a cornerstone of American roots music, would be preserved for future generations. His commitment to the museum reflected his deep love for the music that had shaped his career and his desire to share that passion with others. Additionally, Roy co-founded the Roy Clark Celebrity Golf Classic, an annual event that raised millions of dollars for children's charities over the years. True to his character, Roy approached this work without fanfare, never seeking the spotlight for his charitable efforts. His involvement was driven by a genuine desire to give back to the community, particularly to support children in need. These quiet acts of generosity underscored the depth of Roy's character, a man who, despite his fame, remained grounded in his values and committed to making a difference in the lives of others. Though the bright lights of mainstream fame may have softened over time, Roy Clark's influence endures as a testament to his extraordinary talent, warmth, and authenticity. He was more than a performer. He was a trailblazer who helped redefine country music's place in American culture, a mentor who inspired countless musicians, and a philanthropist who gave selflessly to causes he believed in. The king of the cornfield may have slipped from the center of the spotlight, but his legacy remains etched into the DNA of modern music, a beacon of joy, skill, and humanity that continues to inspire. On November 15th, 2018, Roy Clark passed away at his home in Tulsa, Oklahoma, from complications of pneumonia. He was 85 years old. The outpouring of love and respect was immediate and immense. Dolly Parton called him one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived. Brad Paisley wrote a moving tribute, stating simply, "I am a guitarist because of Roy Clark. He was my first hero." The Grand Ole Opry, the institution that once cast him out, dimmed its lights in his honor, calling him country music's greatest ambassador. His passing forced a cultural reappraisal. Obituaries in the New York Times and Rolling Stone reminded the world of the staggering scope of his talent, celebrating the man who was both a down-home comedian and a globally revered musician. For a moment, the cultural ghost was brought back into sharp focus, and the world remembered that the man with the infectious grin from Hee Haw was, without question, one of the most brilliant and beloved musical talents America has ever produced. In the end, Roy Clark's legacy is not measured in chart positions or television ratings, but in his role as a bridge. He was a bridge between country and pop, between rural and urban, between America and the world. He was a bridge between staggering technical complexity and simple, unpretentious joy. His goal was never to build an immortal monument to his own fame, but to use his extraordinary gift to bring a little happiness into people's lives. So, while the name Roy Clark might now be the answer to a trivia question for some, his true legacy lives on. It lives in the fingers of every guitarist who strives for both speed and soul. It lives in the laughter of families who gathered around the television on a Saturday night. And it lives in the countless smiles his music continues to create, a timeless echo of a man who played not for glory, but for the pure, simple love of the song.